Hello and happy March. My name is Sophia. Welcome to my channel. I post crochet content, reading content, and a little bit of everything about my life here. Today I wanted to talk about all the books that I read in February. Just a little disclaimer before we get started. If you see me looking over this way, I do just have my laptop open with some notes so I remember to tell you guys everything about the books I read. In the month of February, I was able to read 10 books, which last year I did a lot of reading. My biggest reading year ever with 72 books, and in I believe it was July and November were my biggest reading months ever, and those are both 10 books. So now February equals that but doesn't surpass. I've never read more than 10 books in a month, which for me 10 books in a month is pretty intense, and I don't feel like I should go over that unless I have time, because I don't want to be reading books to sort of achieve some sort of goal. I really just want to read books because I enjoy it and because, you know, it's entertaining for me. But when you start reading books just to hit a certain number, I don't think that's good, if that makes sense. But yeah, 10 books, split them up. It was 6 ebook, 3 audiobook, and just 1 physical, which is quite unusual for me. Up until really like October maybe, I really was never reading ebooks. And then I got a library card and I was able to access this online platform Libby, which has audiobooks and ebooks. So then that really increased because I had access to a lot more books without having to buy them. But usually still I read more physical books because it gets my eyes away from the screen, and I feel like a lot of what I do is just like screen. So I usually just read more physical books, but I guess this month was not true. And unfortunately this month it was a lot of just okay books. Nothing really stood out to me except for some that were bad. And unfortunately there were no 5 stars for this month, but again, that's okay. So to start with, the first book that I read was called All the Water in the World by Erin Kafal, and this was an ebook from Libby. It is a debut novel from this author, and I mentioned this in my most anticipated reads of the year when I did my 2024 reading wrap up and looking ahead into the new year. So it came out, I believe, just at the beginning of January. This follows our main character Noni, I'm not sure, and her small group of survivors that live on the roof of the American History Museum in New York City after floods and climate change have completely ravaged America into a watery wasteland. And then a superstorm breaches the city's flood walls, and Nani and her family escape north on the Hudson River. This book, it was like I was really excited for it because I haven't read a great dystopian book in a while, but I found that the characters lacked depth, especially the main character and like the surrounding supporting characters, which was hard for me because then I just didn't really care like what happened to them. It's also quite slow and repetitive, it feels, which makes sense for the world that they're living in. When it's such an apocalyptic world, you have these specific tasks that you need to do. But just with the sort of like unfeeling character and it being so slow and repetitive, it was like kind of hard for me to pick up, and I felt that once I got halfway through I was reading it so that I could finish it and so that it wouldn't become a DNF, but not because I was actually enjoying the story. This was a more middle grade book, but it did have some intense themes, so content warning for that, of death, young sort of child death, parental death, and also I was also a little bit confused on the way that the world worked with the water. For an example, like they were living on the roof of the American History Museum. It says, like that's what it says, but then it says that they would be going down into Central Park and growing food there. But then it would say that they can't go past like a certain level of floor because everything below that was flooded. So then how are you growing food in Central Park if everything is flooded? And then when the storm hit and they had to leave, and it actually is like the adventure part of the story, it says that while they were canoeing, their boat they would like hit the tops of trees, and then they would say that they would look down in the water and they couldn't see like the bottom of the trees or like any land. But then a few pages later, they would be pulling the boat up to shore, and then there was no, like they were like seeing houses and everything like that. So I understand that there's like changes in altitude and elevation and hills and stuff like that, but it was like didn't really make sense, and I knew that I was following this story well, so it wasn't just a me thing. Maybe it just felt like this happened too many times to be understood, and not to mention the cover of the book itself has the buildings submerged in water. And I know that covers aren't supposed to like tell the story, but that was just an aspect that I was like, okay, this is kind of really confusing how literally one page where like the whole world is underwater, and then the next page we're on land and like going to houses and stuff. But wouldn't the houses be underwater? Like, I can't think of a place that has such a drastic change, especially not New York City. Like, that's kind of a pretty flat area. But anyways, maybe that's just me. But the ending did help to redeem this book a little bit. I thought that it was cute and helped to wrap up the story well. But yeah, that was a 3-star read from me. On to the second book of the month was Wild Faith, How the Christian Right is Taking Over America by Talia Lavin. This was an audiobook. It came out in October of 2024, so there were lots of current references in it. I'm not going to say much about this because I feel like I'm not very eloquently spoken, and sometimes I just like can't really put my thoughts into words, especially when it comes to heavy topics such as this one. This was hard for me to listen to at times because while I like to be educated on what's going on in current times and in the world, it also makes me a little bit depressed to hear how heartless and selfish some people can be, especially when they put that out as saying that it's religion-based, but I really don't think that it is when you look at the core aspects of religion. I think this is just using that as a front, like, poster, but then what's going on truthfully is not based in religion. It was incredibly well researched, and it was very fact and statistics and number heavy, which I really enjoyed. So yeah, this was a 4-star for me because it was interesting, but I do feel like some aspects of it will fall away from my knowledge. Then I read Miss Ice Sandwich by Miko Kawakami. This was a physical book, my only physical book of the month. It's a very short book and part of my effort of working through all of Miko Kawakami's books because I just really love her as an author. This follows our young male main character who's elementary school grade, which is a lot different from other Miko Kawakami books where it tends to be an older, maybe like mid-30s aged woman. And our main character has a bit of an obsession with a woman at the grocery store. And I won't say too much because it's such a short book that I feel like saying too much is just gonna, give away the whole thing. But it is just like a slice of life novel where it just follows him and his thoughts and, him in school. And then also this building obsession, if you want to call it that, but it isn't really harmful, of this woman. And also he's learning about how the way that you perceive some people may not be how everyone perceives them, and how that can change your own perception of said people. This was a 4-star read for me because I really enjoyed it and I thought it was cute, but it was missing that little kick that Miko Kawakami's books usually give me. But yeah, 4 stars is pretty good anyways. Next, we had another audiobook, which is On the Hippie Trail, Istanbul to Kathmandu in the Making of a Travel Writer by Rick Steves. I listened to it in one sitting. It's a very, very short audiobook. The title is exactly what the book is. It's read by the author, and basically the whole book is him reading a journal that he wrote while he was taking this hippie trail in the 70s. This was interesting, but I felt that it lacked depth because he's a very famous travel writer now, and I've even read and used some of the stuff that he has available on his website for my own travels and finding out what to do and where to visit and stuff like that. But he was really just reading out the journal that he made, and I felt like this book could have really been added to and helped if he had put in tidbits like from his today point of view of like what he thinks of it now being so much more well-traveled, and more just like how this changed him as a person instead of just reading out word for word the journal. And also, maybe this is a weird take, but I felt like he said at the beginning of the book that he didn't change anything that he wrote to be more like politically correct or whatever, like in this day and age. Like, he left it how he wrote it in the 70s. But again, I would have liked to hear him talk, like he could have left that stuff in, which it wasn't really that bad, but it was just him being like, he's a white man and he's a little bit privileged, and then he's going to visit these other places, which is okay. But I would have liked him now going back and maybe talking a little bit about how he, like, did he see any women doing this experience, or were there any like people of color doing this experience, and maybe like how that would have changed, or like just how he thinks that his privilege like helped him through it. I don't know, maybe that's a weird thing to say, but I just felt like he said that he left it all in. Yeah, that's good, he left it all in so he could know, so that we could hear like what it actually was like for him back in the 70s. But I just feel like a lot of like introspection could have been added to the book, but maybe that's just me. The book did just come out this month, so that's really exciting. I did end up giving this 4 stars after I read it, partially because, and I need to stop doing this, but it had very small number of reviews on Goodreads and most of them were really high, so then I was like, oh, okay, I should do a high one anyways. But after thinking about it a little bit more in preparation for this video, I think that I would take that more down to a 3. Next, I read A Suffragist Guide to the Antarctic by Yi Shun Lai, which was another ebook, and this is another debut from this author, so I'm reading a lot of debuts this month. Again, this was a middle grade book. It had a bit of more of a middle grade voice, I felt, but it did have some heavy themes as well. It is written in the form of a girl's journal, and this girl just happens to be living in the times of the suffragists and women's voting rights movement. And then she joins a ship as the only woman on that crew, and unfortunately that ship does get trapped in ice in the Antarctic, so it goes through her time of trying to survive with the crew. This was like fun, and it did take me back to that time, but I do feel that it was a little bit unrealistic. Obviously I haven't lived through that time, but I felt like the other older men on that ship were quite easygoing on her and being quite nice to her as a woman, and especially when the boat crashed in an Antarctic, in my mind, the other men would have been a lot worse towards her, even in the current age, so I can't imagine it back then. But also maybe that's just me being negative, and also the author didn't intend to write, you know, like this horrible book. So that's just me being like historical or whatever, but it was fun. The ending, unfortunately, was not great for me. I felt that there was a lot of, I felt personally that I would have done it differently, but I also don't know exactly if my way would have made it so much better. And just a small content warning that there is a little bit of animal death in this, just because they have to like kill penguins basically to survive, but it was just a little bit hard for me to read, so just if you're not wanting to read that. I did end up giving this one 3 stars because I just unfortunately felt like it came and went and it didn't really leave too much with me. Next, we have something that brings us up a little bit, really fun and back to my usual genre, was New Animal by Ella Baxter, and this was another ebook. This follows our main character, Amelia, who is going through life without any major connections except for that she has with her family. She enjoys men, but only for one thing, and that thing happens in the bedroom. And once that is over, she is done with them and on to the next. And I'm not shaming that in any way. On Goodreads, it says something happened to her mom. And I'm just gonna say a little bit of a spoiler warning for here. I personally don't think it's a spoiler because it happened in a few pages, so okay. So her mom passes away suddenly by just falling downstairs. And again, this happens in the first few pages. So she's dealing with the heavy and intense grief that follows. And she's also working at her family's own funeral home. So she's surrounded by death all the time, but not such a personal and close death. And she was very close with her mom. So then after this loss, she decides to move away from this area that is causing her so much grief to Tasmania, where her biological dad lives, that she has a minimal connection with. And she just happens to get caught up in the Tasmanian interesting experiences scene. I don't know how much I can say. I never know how much I can say, but it's something that some people do for fun that involves a lot of leather and whips and chains and stuff like that. I thought that this showed a really good portrayal of grief, and I do believe that it was funny in times in a cringy way. I felt bad for her like in the moment, but I also think that the character further in her life, once she's gotten a little bit past the grief, could look back at this time and think that the choices that she was making was a little bit funny. And a content warning for less than consensual experiences in that setting that I was mentioning. Yeah, she needs an intervention of her father and family back home to understand that she's gonna be okay. Yeah, I thought this was fun. It was 4 stars because again, it was just lacking that final push for me to bring it up to a 5-star, but I do think that I'll think about some of the elements of this book for a while to come, and I'm definitely going to look into more by Ella Baxter in the future. So yeah, 4 stars. Next, we had another audiobook, which is From Here by Luma Muffla, and this is a coming-of-age memoir, and she herself is a refugee advocate who is also a gay Muslim woman who grew up in the Middle East and then is now an American refugee. This was really interesting and emotional at times, and I never really like to comment too much on memoirs because who am I to say if it's good or not? Like, it's their story, you know, it's their life. But this really takes us through her whole life, from her first memories that she has as a child all the way to the present day where she is a mother and married to her wife. Yeah, she just sounds like a great person, and that's all I'll say. So I ended up giving this one 4 stars as well. Okay, next we had something that really missed the spot for me. This was We Had to Remove This Post by Hannah Bervowitz. This was an ebook again, and this is following our main character who works at an office where she is a content moderator for an unspecified social media platform, where basically all day she has to look through flagged posts and see if they are too bad and need to be taken down or if they should be left up, which means that she's looking at a lot of disturbing content all day. Also, I just wanted to say sorry if it's starting to get a little bit darker in here. It is currently 4:45, so the sun is setting. Not to mention that it is a big storm rolling in, hopefully our last snow of the year, so it's quite cloudy outside. So yeah, sorry if the lighting is getting quite bad. But yeah, again, short book. I read this just in one day and it did really fall flat for me. A social commentary on office culture and how we are quite desensitized to what goes on social media, but I felt like this book didn't really portray it well. Maybe because it was so short. I was quite into it in the first half, but then in the second half I was like, what? Like, what is this? And then the book just ends. Like, it just ends just where I thought that it could start to get really interesting, so I felt like maybe if the author ran with it a little bit more, then it could have been really good and we could like learn about why this job is actually so horrible and the changes that it could make on people and their own actions, but we just didn't. And this also might be a bad thing to say, but I felt like if the book is supposed to be shocking and gory and show the dark side of humanity, it really didn't for me. The content that they were discussing felt rather surface level, and I think I have personally heard of or seen worst things on the internet, and I'm not a content moderator. I've read books that aren't marketed as being gory or gross, and they were more than this book, which is marketed as such. I don't know if that's making sense, but maybe that's just going into the point of how we are too desensitized to this material. But I just felt like, don't market the book as being like gross and showing this dark side when it's like, and I don't want to say that it's like surface level because that's such a weird thing to say, but maybe you understand what I mean, if it being like not that bad. But again, I don't know. I just don't know how to get this thought out correctly, but hopefully that makes enough sense. There was also a little bit of a stalking element, which I thought was quite weird, and the author didn't really explain it as it was because of the content that they were doing. It was just like the character just decided to stalk someone. So yeah, watch out for that. And this one was 2 stars for me because it really fell flat, and I had heard about this book for a while and was really looking forward to it, just for it to be a bit disappointing. Okay, second last book, we have Last Night I Sang to the Monster by Benjamin Al-Alir Sains. Sorry if I'm pronouncing that wrong. Again, another ebook. I read this in just one sitting over a few hours while I was getting my stomach tattooed, which I did film and post to my channel if you're interested in that. I'm gonna just read exactly what it says on Goodreads because I thought it said it really well. It says, Zach is 18. He is bright and articulate. He's also an alcoholic and in rehab instead of high school, but he doesn't remember how he got there. He's not sure he wants to remember. Something bad must have happened. Something really, really bad. Remembering sucks and being alive, well, what's up with that? So that's what the Goodreads says. Now to my thoughts. This just fell flat for me. Again, like all the other books, I feel like I'm saying that too much, but I'm not really that stingy with my rating, so I feel like it was just the books and not me. I was excited to understand the story, but we never really learned it. I felt like the big twist that was supposed to come was revealed in one sentence, and then I was like, okay, can we like circle back to that and explain more about it? And we just never really did. And there were also other unanswered questions that were brought up, and then I thought that we would come back to them, and it just wasn't. It was an interesting look at why people may end up at rehab centers and the relationships that can be formed there, whether they are good or bad and, you know, helpful or harmful. Again, the book, it kind of just happened. And a content warning for sibling abuse, death, and substance use in this one. So that was 3 stars for me. And the last book did bring it up a little bit. This was Ripe by Sarah Rose Eder, which was another ebook. Last book of the month. Similar to We Had to Remove This Post, this is a commentary on office culture, but this one is more about like the tech world and how much people are expected to work, like the hours that they're expected to put in, which really aren't sustainable in the long run. This takes place in the near future, or even just current day San Francisco, and our main character works at a tech firm in Silicon Valley. She's expected to pile on more and more hours, and it just goes through how that affects her mental health and who she is as a person. She also doesn't really have a great relationship with her family and just has a few friends since she moved to San Francisco mainly for the job and doesn't have much time outside to make friends. This one did do it better than We Had to Remove This Post. There were some shocking elements that I really enjoyed, and there were also a little bit of body horror elements, which were also cool. This does talk a lot about how your friends or like co-workers in the office will walk all over you and throw you under the bus just to get themselves ahead, which I feel like does happen too much in life, and personally I would never do something like that, so I don't know why some people do, but unfortunately it happens a lot. So yeah, 4 stars for me for that one. And those were the 10 books that I read in February. I hope you enjoyed my thoughts on them. I always enjoy doing these reading videos. This is now my 2nd of the year and maybe 4th or 5th in total that I've done on this channel. They're just really fun for me. They don't do like well on my channel, but everything that I do on this channel is just for fun. I'm not trying to, you know, make money or be famous or anything like that. So I hope that a few people enjoy them, and yeah, if you want, let me know what you're reading currently. I'd love to know and get some recommendations as well. And yeah, thank you so much for watching, and I'll be posting a lot of videos in between, but I'll also see you next month to talk about all the books I read in March. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you then.